Imagine the most isolated workplace you can think of. Now go further. A bare, wind-scoured rock in the cold gray Atlantic, 20 miles from the nearest inhabited land, with no harbor, no shelter, nothing but a white stone tower and the sea on every side. That was the Flannan Isles Lighthouse off the west coast of Scotland. And just before Christmas in the year 1900, 3 experienced men were stationed there, and they walked out of that lighthouse and were never seen again. No bodies, no survivors, no certain answer, even now, more than a century later. Let me tell you what we actually know, because the truth has been buried under so much legend that it's worth digging out carefully. First, the place. The Flannan Isles are a tiny scatter of uninhabited islands in the Outer Hebrides, out past the Isle of Lewis, in some of the roughest water in the British Isles. The largest of them is called Eilean Mor, Gaelic for Big Island, though it's anything but big. It's a wind-swept hump of rock with sheer cliffs dropping straight into the ocean. The lighthouse had only been operating for about a year. It was a marvel of engineering for its day. They'd had to carve landing places and stairs into the cliffs just to build it. And it was manned by a rotating crew of keepers. 3 men on the rock at any time, with a 4th ashore on leave, cycling through. In December of 1900, the 3 men on duty were James Ducat, the principal keeper, a steady, experienced man with a family back on shore, Thomas Marshall, the 2nd assistant, and Donald McArthur, who was an occasional keeper. He was filling in for the 1st assistant, William Ross, who was off sick. So, 3 seasoned lighthouse men, doing a job they knew well, on a rock they knew well, keeping a light burning for the ships that passed in the night. And then the light went out. Here's the first thread. On the night of December 15th, a passing steamer called the Arctur, bound from Philadelphia to the port of Leith, went by the Flannan Isles, and her crew noticed that the lighthouse was dark. That was wrong. That was the one thing a lighthouse must never be. But through a series of delays, that report didn't reach the lighthouse authorities right away. And the relief vessel that was supposed to go out and rotate the crew was itself held up by bad weather. So for days, that light stayed dark, and nobody was able to get out to the rock to find out why. It wasn't until Boxing Day, December 26th, 11 days later, that the relief tender, a ship called the Hesperus, finally fought through the seas and reached Eilean Mor. And straight away, the crew knew something was wrong. Normally, as a relief ship approached, the keepers would be out, flags flying, ready to receive supplies. But there was no flag on the flagstaff, no keepers waiting, no response to the ship's whistle or to a flare they sent up. The rock was silent. A relief keeper named Joseph Moore was put ashore, and he climbed the long, steep steps up to the lighthouse alone. And you have to imagine what that climb felt like, the dread building with every step. He reached the entrance gate, and it was closed. The main door was closed. Inside, the lighthouse was empty. The beds were unmade or empty. The clock had stopped. The fire in the grate was long dead and cold. And there were no keepers. Not in the tower, not in the living quarters, nowhere on that small rock. 3 men had simply vanished from a sealed lighthouse in the middle of the ocean. Now, let me deal with the myths right here, because this is where the story gets corrupted. You will hear, in 100 retellings, that Moore found a meal sitting half-eaten on the table, a chair knocked over as if the men had leapt up in terror, and a logbook full of chilling final entries describing a monstrous storm, one keeper weeping, another praying, ending with the line, "God is over all." It's wonderfully eerie, and it is almost entirely invented. Those dramatic log entries are a later fabrication. They were never in the real record. The half-eaten meal and the toppled chair come mostly from a famous 1912 poem about the disappearance, not from the actual investigation. I'm telling you this not to spoil the ghost story, but because the real evidence is more revealing than the fiction, and the real men deserve facts, not props. So here's what the official investigation actually found. The superintendent of the Lighthouse Board, a man named Robert Muirhead, who had personally hired these keepers and knew them, went out to the rock and examined everything. And the most important clues weren't inside the lighthouse at all. They were down at the west landing, the exposed jetty where supplies came ashore on that side of the island. Down there, Muirhead found signs of tremendous violence. Not human violence, but the violence of the sea. There was serious storm damage. A storage box that was fixed to the rock a full 110 feet above sea level had been smashed and emptied. Iron railings were bent and buckled. A heavy block of stone had been shifted. Ropes were strewn about, and turf had been torn from the cliff edge, well above the normal reach of the waves. The ocean, in other words, had reached up the cliff face to a height that should have been impossible, and had hammered the landing with appalling force. And inside the lighthouse, there was one more crucial detail. The keepers' oilskins, their heavy waterproof coats and sea boots, the gear you'd put on to go out into foul weather, were missing for two of the men, Ducat and Marshall. But the third man, Donald McArthur, his oilskins were still hanging up inside. He had gone outside without his weather gear. So Muirhead pieced together the most likely explanation, and it's the one that still stands as the best answer we have. He concluded that on December 15th, two of the keepers, Ducat and Marshall, had gone down to the west landing during dangerous weather to secure the equipment and the supply box before a coming storm could damage it. They'd put on their oilskins for the job. And then a freak wave, what sailors call a rogue sea, an unusually massive surge, came rushing up the rock face. Muirhead's theory was that it swept over them with immense force and carried them straight off the cliff into the ocean, and that missing third oilskin may be the key to the whole thing. Because here's the chilling reconstruction that many have drawn from it. If Donald McArthur was inside the lighthouse and saw, through the window, a monstrous wave bearing down on his two colleagues at the landing, he might have bolted out the door to warn them or help them, not even stopping to grab his coat. And in doing so, he ran straight into the path of the sea. All three, caught by the same wave, gone in an instant. It would explain everything. The two coats taken and one left, the door shut behind a man in a hurry, the catastrophic damage at exactly that landing. It's the explanation that fits the evidence best. But, and this is why the case never dies, it can never be proven. No bodies were ever recovered. No one witnessed it. It is a reconstruction, a very good one, but the ocean kept its secret. And into that gap of certainty, a century of imagination has poured. Sea monsters, ghost ships, a fight among the keepers, abduction, even alien theories. None of them have a shred of evidence. But the human mind cannot abide a sealed room and three vanished men, and so the legends grow. What I keep coming back to is the loneliness of it. These weren't careless men. They were professionals doing a hard, isolated job, keeping a light burning so that other people, strangers on passing ships, could find their way safely home through the dark. And the most probable truth is that the very sea they were warning others about reached up one December afternoon and took them, silently, completely, with no one to see and no one to tell. The light they tended went dark, and they went with it. James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, Donald McArthur. 3 keepers of the Flannan Isles light, lost to the Atlantic just before Christmas, 1900. The lighthouse still stands out there on Island Moor to this day. Automated now, no keepers needed. But on a wild night, with the wind screaming and the waves clawing up the cliffs, it's not hard to understand why people still wonder what really happened on that rock. The likeliest answer is the sea. The honest answer is that we will never be completely sure. Thank you for sitting with me here in the quiet dark. If this story stayed with you, leave a like so it reaches more people, subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.